camera will start. There we go. Okay. I like standing up when I teach, even though there's no whiteboard here anymore. Science. So, today we're going to be talking about world building for your sci-fi and fantasy universes, but specifically with religions, because let's be real here, the whole time that any sort of sentient life form exists, they generally create some sort of religion, some sort of belief system, because we all want to know what happens after death, right? But none of us actually know. And so as a result, this causes a lot of various musings into what happens, into what we think happens, into what we believe in, what we worship, what we see as interesting or intriguing, or heck, even what we don't worship. If we believe we literally just dissolve into nothing when we die, that's also a belief structure and a form of belief. So with that being said, how do we decide what our fantasy and science fiction characters believe in? I think that's a great question to pose to yourself, especially if you are creating a whole new world, and it's not just like with Harry Potter where it's them in the modern universe. What do they believe in? What do they feel? What do they think about these different things? First thing you want to address is, what do they value, and what kind of things do they value in society? So, for example, a lot of people theorize that the reason why God is a guy is because of a lot of patriarchal structures. Now, whether or not that's true, who knows? It's up to you to decide. It's up to you and your own beliefs and your own religions. But point being is that a lot of people theorize that the only reason that is because of the patriarchy, and that if we were in a matriarchy, maybe God would be seen as a woman and seen as a female figure, as a goddess. Yeah, exactly. And so it's one of these things that you need to think about with regards to what they care about as a society as well. For example, hello, today we're talking about world building, please close the door. Specifically with building your own fantasy and science fiction religions and belief structures. All the way, please. Okay. All right. So the first thing you need to decide is what your culture believes in, what they like to do, and what they think about. So for example, let's go with Greek mythology. There's a reason why Zeus is in charge in Greek mythology, because it was very much a patriarchy. And so Zeus is king, Zeus is in charge, Zeus is He-Man, muscles, wow, power. And he says like 75 million women that he's just like, I flirt with you, and you, and you, and oh, I'm sorry, Hera, I know technically you're my wife, but no. Goodbye. So it also shows you what they feel. They didn't necessarily believe that fidelity was a thing. They were like, you can sleep with whoever you want. What does it matter? What's fidelity? It's when you're faithful to someone, like a spouse. Someone you're married to.
Okay, I knew I heard the word before.
There we go. Anyway, so with that being said, deciding whether you have many gods or one can also be something that a culture shows. A lot of religions that believe in only one god also tend to believe that that god is perfect and believes that you have to be perfect, right? Whereas a lot of the religions that have many gods are like, the gods are messed up too, so it's okay. It's okay that we make mistakes because, Loki over there, king of mistakes. And so as a result, it's a lot more relaxed. I mean, it could be interesting, obviously, to create your own religion in a fantasy universe where all the gods are perfect and see you as perfect and are like in that kind of structure. But it's not very common, I would say. Most of the time when there are many gods, it's because of the fact that people want to pick a belief and kind of ignore all the rest. Makes it easier to be like, oh, well, today I'm worshiping Thor, so we can forget what Odin believes. It's fine. He'll forgive me later. Whereas when you believe in one god, you kind of got to be on the same page as everyone, right? So you also can decide what your god or goddess is like. If you're going to do a multifaceted, god tier, though, you have to decide how many gods are main gods, how many minor gods you have, and then you also got to decide. I thought the door was completely unlocked. Dang it. Thank you. See there? You could, absolutely, if you wanted to. So, with making a bunch of gods and goddesses, I would say also typically each god and goddess will have a lot of things they're over. It's not just, oh, hey, Apollo, god of the sun. Apollo's also the god of music and the god of poetry and the god of a bunch of other things. And they all typically have their own animal that they represent, and they all and all these different things. Whereas with having just one god in your religion system, makes it a lot more simplified. He represents everything and everyone. Makes it easier, right? So it all depends on what you want your fantasy world to be like, what you want them to believe in. Speaking of which, moving forward to the next topic. What do you what do you believe your characters believe about the afterlife? Some religions, for example, like with Norse mythology, they believed that if you died fighting exactly, if you died fighting, you will go to Valhalla, and you truly have to be fighting. They believed that you even got bonus points and got to like higher levels of Valhalla if you died with a sword in your hand. You know, you had to be extra cool. But they also believed you could go straight to Valhalla if you faced death with pure bravery. So like there was all these crazy torture methods that they would do, and they believed that if you did not scream while being tortured, straight to heaven.
Like, maybe that's what the guy in Princess Bride was when he was like,
yes, Valhalla.
Gryffindor.
Take your mouth shut. There you go. Cheat code.
Technically, he did scream while dying, but then he came back. Maybe he just popped in for quick visits. Okay, bye.
Some guys leaves. But yes. So what do they believe needs to get you into heaven? What does your god or goddess that you worship in your fantasy or sci-fi universe believe that you need to do in order to be worthy of this extra amazing palace-like place? And what is their heaven like? For example, Christian heaven is very much like singing and peace and love, and whereas Valhalla is literally we go to war every day, and we kill each other every day. Yeah, literally, they believe they would just go to war every day, and then at the end of the day, they would all have a big party and a feast, and then they would go to sleep, and then that same thing next day.
That's like my dream.
And so
That would suck.
the thing, a lot of people think that sucks, but for them, they were like, "This is awesome." So it also shows what they value.
Yeah, you could like, and you would never really get tired.
Right? So it all depends on what they value too. As a culture, they valued bravery and valiance and fighting and being. Whereas with Christian culture, we try to value more like being kind and thoughtful and like spiritual and otherworldly. And so it all depends on what your fantasy/science fiction religion believes. A great example of this, as we've talked about in the past, is Avatar: The Last Airbender. They have a great system with the way they create their mythologies, with Aang believing in this whole like I can't hurt anyone, I gotta get peace. Yes, all life is sacred, including the guy who's an absolute psycho and wants to kill everyone. Yep. And so there's all sorts of crazy things like that. And so there's all sorts of different religions and different beliefs. And yet it was clear with the Fire Nation that wasn't necessarily something they believed in. They believed in more the fact that dragons were sacred and that fire and passion was sacred. And they would conquer, very war kind of people. And then you have earthbenders who are very much believing in kind of like strength and solitude and different things like that. They were very community based. Face things head on together as a full force. And then you have the water tribe, which was very much like go with the flow, very family centered, very like be generous and thoughtful. And so it all creates kind of these different cultures around these different religions.
The waterbender tribe, they kind of like worship the koi fish.
Yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff where they have symbolic actual things that they worship, like the moon and the koi fish and all these different things. My girlfriend became the moon. Yes, poor Sokka, Pat's head.
You were my grandma.
Anyway, now you got to think, if you're going to think about one side, you got to think about the other side, right? Because a lot of people, there are some people who believe in multifacets of heaven and multifacets of the other place. But some people just believe in one or the other, right? So, for example, going back to the Norse mythology, they personally believed that their version of hell spelled with one L, because for some reason that's how they spelled it.
Hey,
Yeah,
this word
so-
is spelled with two L's. Let's change it to one.
Well, the funniest part is that I think it was the reverse. I think that because their goddess of the underworld is named Hel with one L, and her technically full name is Helen. Anyway.
Okay, I'm confused. Which one
Next time I see
was
someone named Helen, I'm gonna go.
Which came first? I don't know. But anyway, so with that, they personally believed that in the underworld you were lost forever. You were just wandering this kind of eternal nothingness forever.
Yeah,
Exactly,
that-
land of the
that's
forgotten.
That's like the one thing I never. That's like nightmare fuel. That's the one thing I'm
Being
really
lost
scared
forever.
for.
No, for sure. I think a lot of people are, and I think that's why they determined that to be hell, because they were like, you're completely just lost and wandering by yourself forever in this nothingness. And so that was their idea of the ultimate worst place. Was
There's
wandering and
nothing
lost.
left.
Yeah, exactly. And it's fascinating. And then you have obviously, the Christian thing, the classic, Satan, brimstone, demon, jazz. And then you also have like Greek mythology where they had levels to the underworld. You all went to the underworld, but then it depended on whether you went to the fields of Asphodel, Elysium, all these different things.
Adventure Time? That's kind of what it looks like. It's like the fields of Asphodel, and then like they torture everybody.
But see, that's the thing. Everyone had a different belief system as to where you went and why you went there. So if you're going to build a little religion for your science fiction or fantasy culture, think about these things. Think about not only what they value, but what heaven looks like to them and what heck looks like to them. What is their worst nightmare as a culture?
Being dishonored.
Dishonor.
Dishonor.
All right. So, next thing you want to look into is what they find sacred. For example, going back to the Norse mythology, battle was sacred for them. Battle was absolutely considered a sacred thing for them. Death was considered sacred to them. There were some people that even believed that if they gave themselves up as a human sacrifice to their king, when their king went to Valhalla, they would go with them automatically.
What? That's cool.
And so, like, all these different crazy things that people believed with regards to what is sacred and what is holy. And then, for example, as Christians, a lot of us have a book, right? Whether it's the Bible or something else, we have some sort of sacred text, right? And so, with that, what do you find? What does your fantasy world find sacred? What are their sacred texts? Are there sacred texts written on walls? Are there sacred texts told orally through just passing it down to generation verbally? Or is it physically translated into text? Do those texts have paintings on them?
Physically translated.
Old. Do they have scrolls?
Oh, like shadow puppetry?
Looks like
Oh,
Jason like shadow puppetry. In that country
Yeah, there's all sorts of different things that people find sacred as a way of telling their mythology and a way of telling their beliefs. Then you also have what are sacred symbols to them and what things do they see as sacred. For example, with Norse mythology, they saw ravens as sacred because they were the ultimate messengers from Odin, the Allfather, the person who's over everything, right? And so as a result, they saw anytime you saw a raven, it was supposed to be a good omen. Whereas in Christianity, it's actually considered a bad omen, death, all these things. It's kind of weird that they have these so opposite things
For the same thing.
for the same thing.
This one thing symbolizes two things that are
Completely different. Yes, in different religions. The next thing that you need to think about after symbols is what their churches or places of worship are like. Going back to Avatar: The Last Airbender, the koi fish pond, right? The beautiful, absolutely gorgeous temple to those koi fish, like that is their place of worship for the water tribe, right? And so, and to see like what kind of things they would do. And then the airbender temples, very much like skyward structures, and they have all of this architecture. Yes, and they're very skyward facing. And so you have all these things that show you kind of what they believe in, even just how they look. For example, Aztecs and Egyptians, they both believed like reach for the sky, man, as far as you can. Pyramids. Like, dude, let's keep going. And meanwhile, you have other religions that personally were a lot more down to earth and believe that art was a good way of representing it. Greek mythology is very much this way, where they believed the more statues and the more art that their temples had, the more it was truly a symbol to their gods. And then you have, with Norse mythology, a lot of their temples were carved out of wood, and a lot of their gods were actually represented in physical carvings. And they had an actual form that said, this is how Thor is always carved, this is how Odin is always carved, all of these different things. And so, what your religion for your sci-fi or fantasy universe has for holy places can also be very telling as to what they believe in. All right. That is true. Back then, that was pretty much the only material they had. But nowadays, I don't think they would do as much of that. Speaking of which, so we have two more things, and then we're actually going to talk about the whole building your temples out of wood, whether or not to kind of thing. First thing though, what do they think of other religions and non-believers? Some religions, like the Greeks, were like, that's really cool. I'm glad you believe in something, man. Pat on the back. Whereas then there were other religions, like the Norse, that were like, dude, all those Christians need to die. And the Christians were like, all those pagans need to die. And so they just killed each other. So there's a lot of people who are very much like, hey, man, that's cool that you believe in another religion. And then there's other people who are very aggressively like, believe my religion. Exactly, or else I'll punch your face kind of thing. It's like, okay, buddy. So what do they think of non-believers? What do they think of other religions? Are they respectful, or are they kind of like, believe or else I stab you? Like, what's the vibe here? That's actually a very indicative of what their culture is like most of the time. There are some exceptions where they'll be like, we believe in kindness, except for those non-believers. We stab them. So you never know. But that's the beauty of making your own fantasy or science fiction religion, is you can take it whatever direction you want. All right. Last thing, how does technology play into your religion? Now, the reason I say technology is I mean things even just like manufacturing. So back then it was a lot like mechanics. It's a lot harder to make things out of stone when you don't know how to make things out of stone, right? And so that's why a lot of the Norse temples were made out of wood, was because of the fact that that was what they knew best how to work with. As they began to learn how to work with stone more, they absolutely made more stone temples. But it wasn't until they figured out stonework that they started to do that. So you also got to think about where your religion is in respect to culture and in respect to timeline. What have they invented yet? You can also go crazy other directions, like there's a TV show called Stargate that did this, where the idea is that a bunch of aliens with superior technology go to planets that are like medieval level planets and then pretend to be gods. Because I mean, they kind of seem like gods because they have all this technology, right? Wizardry, but it's not really wizardry. And so they'll be like, I cured you of your curse, and in reality, they just used antibiotics to cure your cold, you know? But it seems like magic if you don't know what it is, right? And so you got to take into account, how does technology play in, especially if you're doing science fiction, because there are a lot of science fiction books that will actually have another alien race is worshipped for being like a higher entity intellectually. Or they'll have other things where even there are some AIs that become so intelligent that they become worshipped by certain cultures and different things like that. So think about how your technology, either how far into the future it is or how basic it is. Are they still working with wood to make their temples that could be burned down? You know, kind of good things to think about. And then last but most certainly not least, what your religion thinks regarding weird substances. For example, in Norse mythology, it was actually considered sacred to drink all the time and to get completely and utterly drunk. They were like, woo, that's part of like partying and Valhalla, right? Is getting drunk, and so they saw it as perfectly. Yes. And then Dionysus, the god of wine, you could tell that the Greeks like their wine just a little bit. And then you could also, and then, for example, with Norse mythology, they also saw it as being very, very sacred to say things like hallucinogenic mushrooms and then have an acid trip and be like, I saw Odin. And so you can have all sorts of different things like that, where you can have these various beliefs. And I don't care what you believe in. Whatever you believe in, cool for you. But when you're building fantasy or sci-fi religion, just think about what other things you think would be cool for this concept. They don't even necessarily have to be something that is similar to what you believe in, because that's the beauty of exploring fantasy and science fiction, is exploring other possibilities that aren't necessarily real. All right. So, any questions about world building your own religion slash beliefs?
They call it grass.
No?
Yes.
It is a weird concept, but also if you want to world build a fantasy and sci-fi place better, good way to do it is through religions.
Good way to do it.
Question.
Could you make it like kind of like today, how there's like a bunch of different ones?
Oh, absolutely. I would highly encourage that. I think that the more you have, the more realistic it is, because honestly, there's never just one religion that everyone believes in.
I mean,
Like,
there was medieval England, but a lot of people still don't believe it.
exactly. And then there was a lot of people that were forcibly converted to it too, and different things like that.
Oh my gosh, I read a story
And
about
so,
a child.
yeah, and so as a result, you got to take into account that yes, there may be some dominant religions, but there will be multiple kinds. No matter what you think. I mean, honestly, that's part of the reason why it's so beautiful to look at, is because then you could even have one character who everyone makes fun of him because he believes in this specific god or deity that no one thinks exists, and he's part of this like very, very small church of like 20 people, and then something crazy happens and he's like, see, I told you.
I told you so.
Like, who knows? You can have fun with it. Exactly.
up.
Pay up. You all told me my God wasn't real. Well, look. You know, who knows? You can have fun with it, I guess is my point. You can definitely play with that
I
idea.
saw you here on Saturday. I saw your bike.
All right. So, with that being said, one last announcement, and then I will turn the video off and we can just chill and enjoy writing and whatnot. But this Saturday, we will be having a really cool event. I've already emailed you all about it to let you guys know more details. However, I figured I'd tell you guys anyway. This Saturday, we will be having a fantasy science fiction convention. It should have a lot of authors here, local authors. Probably ones you haven't heard of because they're new and up and coming. They have like 2 or 3 books published kind of thing. But up and coming local Utah authors, as well as local Utah artists, local Utah vendors. We will have food trucks. We will have all sorts of stuff here. It's going to be an absolute blast. If you're interested in any of the writing classes, we will have, let me pull up the schedule. So, August 16th, we will have FantasyCon. And from 10 to 11 a.m., we will be having a Learn How to Draw Castles and Fantasy Landscapes and Unicorns class. So that should be awesome. Then we will have from 11 to 12 a writing class about overcoming discouragement, burnout, and writer's block. Then from 12 to 1, we will have a Learn How to Draw Dragons class. Then from 1 to 2, we will have another writing class. This one will be specifically about like marketing yourself on Instagram, working with other Instagrammers to help market yourself, talking with online beta readers to get feedback on your book, all sorts of things like that. Then we'll have an author Q&A from 2 to 2:15, and then an artist Q&A from 2:15 to 2:30. So even if you can't come to one of those classes for some reason, you can definitely come to the Q&A. And then we will also have a cosplay contest at 2:30. Feel free to come dressed up in a costume. You might win something. And then at 3:30, we will also have a bunch of fun raffle prizes that you can get a ticket for if you go and visit the vendors in the park. This Saturday, August 16th. Should be a blast. It's all day long, but if you want a specific event, those are the times. All right. Next contest that we have is going to be the Scary Story Contest. After the Scary Story Contest, we will then have the first chapter contest.
So we're actually doing it.
Yes, we are. I got the go-ahead. We're officially doing it.
Yes,
The scary story contest will be, I don't remember when the scary story contest will be due. I believe it's sometime the first week of October or something like that.
It should be
Um,
on the week of Halloween.
No, we're having our award ceremony the week of Halloween. So, well, it's a contest, so you gotta have an award ceremony to tell people who won. So, anyway, but yeah, with the first chapter contest, that won't be due until December 20th, so you have lots of time.
I didn't take French in high school. 3 days after my birthday.
The first chapter contest will be 3,000 word limit. The scary story contest is 1,500 word limit. I'm sorry it's so much less, but we literally have so many entrants we would probably perish and die if we did it any longer. Just straight up, just you find me just lying on the floor with a bunch of stories, scary stories, just lying around me. But anyway, so wanted to keep you updated on all those, but I will turn off the video now and we can just talk about rating.